Welcome to Wyoming Armory right here in Cody, Wyoming. Now we're going to start this episode off with a little pop quiz. See, we're working on an old Colt Lightning rifle, and I want to get your opinion. Has this barrel been relined, or is it still in original condition? Okay, so first thing we would normally look for, of course, is a joint or a seam between the liner and the outside of the barrel. Usually about halfway between the bore and the outside of the barrel, and we sure don't see that here, do we? Now the next thing we look for is where this muzzle has been faced off. Now we can hide that seam. A guy that's really good at putting in liners can hide that seam there. But when that liner extends through there, it's got to be cut off and matched up with the outside of the barrel. So that would leave good clean metal across there and take all the old patina off. Now I have seen people come back and put some browning solution or that kind of thing on it, but it's always a pretty good indication if you've got a cleaned off muzzle end like that, that it's been relined. Of course, this looks amazingly like original patina. If somebody had aged that good, they are a real artist. But sure looks like original patina. Okay, before we answer that pop quiz, we're going to give you a little background on this one, because this is a project that is one of those that comes in that ends up being a whole lot more involved than what we anticipated. Now, I got a call from a customer who said, you know, I see on your YouTube channel that you work on Colt Lightnings, and I was out shooting mine the other day and I shot a squib and I just can't get it out. Can I send the barrel up to you and see if you can get it out? Well, unfortunately, getting squibs out is much more common than you might think in this gunsmithing business, and we've had a little experience with it, so I told the guy, yeah, go right ahead, send that barrel up and we'll see if we can't get it out for you. Well, what came was the barrel, the upper part of the receiver. There's a Colt Lightning upper receiver, just kind of a shell. And unfortunately, and these are the actual cleaning rods, a cleaning rod driven into the back of the squib from this end, and another one driven into the front of the squib from this end that was way down in the barrel, no way to get a hold of it. So we were able to take this upper receiver off, and the rod from the back was sticking out here just a little bit, and we were able to get a hold of it and get it out. But then we had the problem, we couldn't get a hold of this other one. So we had to use a little ingenuity and make or find a brass tube that was just the right size to fit down into the bore, and use it as a guide to drill out this squib and into the back of that other cleaning rod so that we could get a thin rod in there and push it out. But in the process of drilling it out, we came across the next kind of an issue here, and that's that this squib started about here on the barrel and it ended right about here. We had a good 6 inches of lead in this barrel. So given the fact that 3220 is a pretty small cartridge with a fairly short lead bullet in it, kind of when you do the math, it looked like we had a whole magazine tube, 15, that were fired into this thing. The first one must have been a squib, or one of the first ones, and then whoever was shooting the gun just kept shooting and filled her up just about as far as could with lead. Now fortunately for the shooter, this is a 3220. Now if it had been a 40 caliber or a 3840, which is actually a 40 caliber, or a 4440, we wouldn't have had near as much steel around that bore. You know, obviously we're going to have a bigger hole through the barrel and a lot less steel to hold it, and I think at the very least that we would have bulged this barrel, and at the very worst this barrel would have come apart and maybe the guy's left hand, because that bunch of lead is right over the top of where his left hand would have been. Very dangerous situation. And when I realized what had happened, I got a hold of the guy and I said, you better check all the rest of the parts, we didn't have them at that time, for overpressure, because obviously that pressure was not going out the end of the barrel, it was coming back this way. So he did, and he found that the locking lug in the that locked the bolt in place which is this part right here, if we can see that all right. This arm here was cracked about halfway across, and probably wouldn't have taken very many more shots, and it would have broken that lug completely off, of course creating a really dangerous situation. But the other thing is, and this is something we all ought to learn by, and for all the thousands of rounds I've shot, I've never shot a squib, so I'm not the voice of experience here, but I can only imagine that both the first squib load would feel different. The recoil would feel different. The fact that these were black powder rounds, the fact that no smoke came out the bore, any of the black powder smoke that exited had to have come out the receiver, and then each subsequent round couldn't have felt the same. I mean, if your recoil doesn't feel the same, if you're shooting black powder especially and you're not seeing any smoke coming out the end of the barrel, time to stop and figure out what's going on. And so this fellow really got pretty lucky in that he wasn't injured. The rifle itself wasn't completely damaged. The barrel actually held up and stayed together. So we had a decision to make now on how to get that squib out of there and what to do to fix this old girl. Now we're at the point we've got both of the cleaning rods that have been embedded pulled out. We've got a fairly small diameter, about a 1/4 inch hole drilled all the way through that 6-inch lead slug, and it's time to see if we can't get it out of there. So I made a little brass plug, the same size as the groove diameter, and used that to have something solid to beat on. We used all sorts of penetrating oil, heat, and beat on it, and all of us in the shop here took some turns and racked our brains about how to get it out, but alas, we had to give it up. There was just no pushing that 6-inch long soft lead slug out of there. So we brought it over here to the lathe, drilled out as much of that as we could, and then whatever residual was left in the grooves, we heated it up enough to get most of that out of there. So now we've got a cleaned up as best we can bore. And at this point, you know, we want to talk a little bit about Colt Lightnings and 3220, because from this era seems like each of the manufacturers had a gun and a caliber that their barrels were oversized for, and 3220 in these Colt Lightnings is just notorious for having oversized bores. The best bores I've seen, and while nominal is a 312 projectile in a 3220, the best I've seen in a good bore is about 314. And I've seen them clear up to, in a not so good bore, clear up around 318, 319. So you can imagine the accuracy problems we have even with good Colt Lightnings, unless you're loading special for them. You know, just cowboy action in these 3220 Lightnings doesn't work. So, you know, my suggestion to the fella, even if we'd been able to get in there and clean this thing up without any drilling damage to the rifling, would have been to reline this bore, and that's exactly what we did. Now we've got enough of that obstruction out of there that we can get our piloted drill to go through this thing and drill it out for a liner. So in a roundabout way, I've answered the question whether this one has been lined or not, and the correct answer is yes, it has. And now, as you can see, the outside of this barrel has its original patina, but it's got a brand spanking new bore, bright and shiny. This thing's going to shoot better than it did when it was brand new with that oversized bore from Colt. And of course, we had the customer send the rest of the parts when we realized we were going to have to reline this bore. And so we've got it properly head spaced, which a lot of these old Lightnings have a lot of extra head space. So this should be an extremely accurate rifle, where it probably never was, even from the first time it was shot. Now, we're not trying to fake anybody. There isn't anybody who could take this old rifle with that old patina and the age on it, put a bore light in it, and look at that brand new bore and not go, this thing's been relined. But so many of our customers, and rightly so, when they send us a gun that's not going to be refinished, they want the original patina left alone. So we do that as much as possible, or try to age things back if we can't. But of course, the first choice is always to leave the original patina. Now, I'm not going to tell you how we do this and how we've managed to reline these and not show up out on the muzzle end. We can still pick it up back on that breech end. That's kind of a trade secret, but you know, this is one of those things where we feel like if we're going to do something, we're going to do it right, and we feel like this is the right way to do it. Well, please don't get the notion that this episode's about advertising for barrel relines at Wyoming Armory. We don't want to get covered up in old barrels for relines. You see, quite the opposite is true. We really only take on a very select few relines, and only then as part of a larger project, or in a case like this Colt Lightning where it came in for some other kind of work and ended up necessitating a reline. You see, by the time we buy a really high quality liner, which is all we use, they cost just about as much as a raw barrel blank. And there's a whole lot more machine time into drilling these out and reaming them, and then installing the liner, chambering, cutting the extractor notches and whatnot, setting headspace, than if we just bought a barrel blank and threaded, chambered, cut dovetails and installed it. So it's really not a very cost-effective way to go. Now, in the instance where we've got somebody that's got a larger restoration or mechanical work on a gun, and they want to reline as part of that larger project and really want to keep the original patina and the original look, then we take on a few of those, and only in lower pressure calibers. You know, the pistol calibers, some of the larger straight-walled old black powder type cartridges, and that type of thing. You know, never in a high pressure cartridge. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, maybe learned a little something, even though we're not letting all our secrets out. Until next time, happy trails from Wyoming Armory in Cody, Wyoming.